Well, hello and welcome to the Rails member update. It is Tuesday, February 11th. My name is Monica Harris, and I'm the executive director here at Rails. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. Many of you realize that it is Valentine's Day this week, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to share some love for all of the library workers who are out there and joining us today. Every day I am so proud of the work that we get to do in serving libraries and all of their communities. All types of libraries have a mission and purpose that is so deeply devoted to sharing learning and fun, creating cultures of collaboration and innovation, and bringing our communities together. Just in case no one else has told you this today, the work that you are doing is important, and I am so
Okay, we
grateful
have
to
to go
call you
on
my
to this.
colleagues. Thank you so much for everything you're doing, and keep up the great work, Illinois. We're going to start out with a little bit of kind of general Rails news, and then we're going to move into some exciting guest speakers that we have for today. But to start, I want to acknowledge that Rails has received some inquiries about our funding. This is a really good opportunity to help address that, so we wanted to start off today just by giving you a little bit more information. As you may or may not be aware, funding for Rails is provided by the Illinois State Library and the Illinois Secretary of State. So the Illinois State Library receives some support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which you may know as IMLS. That's the primary source of federal funding for U.S. libraries and museums. This funding is equivalent to about 10% of the total budget of the Illinois State Library. Rails does receive some money from IMLS, which is distributed to us from the Illinois State Library. A freeze to government grant funding does impact IMLS as well as many other agencies on a federal, state, and local level. And while there's still plenty of uncertainty at the federal level, here at Rails, our funding and our work is currently unchanged. We are going to continue to serve our members and connect our libraries. Due to the prudent financial management of the Rails Board of Directors, we have healthy financial reserves, and we maintain strong partnerships with library organizations across the state. We will continue to do our work to serve our members and your communities. So I know many of you want to know more about how to help advocate on the federal level for libraries. I would encourage you to check out Show Up for Our Libraries, which is the American Library Association's advocacy effort, which was devoted to the importance of federal funding for libraries. To demonstrate our value, Rails will be launching a campaign via our Rails e-news, email lists, and social media. We want people to understand the work that we do and the numbers behind the return on investment that the state of Illinois gets from its library systems. So please keep your eye out for that very soon. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can always email us at communications@railslibraries.org. There are some links in the chat. So there's one to the agenda for today, and Dan also put in a link for Show Up for Our Libraries. I would really encourage you to check that out and take a look at what they have to offer. One Rails resource that I do want to remind you about today is our World Language Cataloging Services program. We are so thrilled with how much this program has grown. In the previous financial year, we cataloged over 800 items in more than 20 languages. That service is available to all Illinois libraries. So if you're a library and you've been considering how to add world languages materials to your collection, let us help you with the cataloging. For more information, you can check it out at railslibraries.org/catalogs. We also wanted to let you know that there's another new episode of our school library focused podcast, Can't Shelve This. The newest episode was published today, and it features a really special guest. That's librarian and TikTok star Michael Threets. This month's episode is called A Love Letter to Libraries. And I know many of you are big fans of Michael, as we are here at Rails. In this episode, Michael talks with our host, Leah Gregory from the Illinois Heartland Library System, and our own Rails data analyst, Jeanette Durucki, about joy in libraries and mental health. It is a really great conversation, and we hope it brings you a little happiness. Can't Shelve This is available wherever you get your podcast, so I encourage you to check it out. And finally, I wanted to mention 2 specific EBSCO packages that we are rolling out for public and school libraries. We know that all of our libraries should have access to the statewide database program that contains EBSCO resources, but we are also offering supplemental packages that complement those resources. So if you are interested, there are several informational webinars coming up, and you can learn more by going to railslibraries.org/deals. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to what we had to share with you today. But with no further ado, we're going to move on to our special guest because we've got some really great content for you today. So we're going to start out with a presentation on public library meeting rooms and the First Amendment given by Julie Tappendorf, who is a partner at Ancel Glink. Julie's here with us today. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, Monica. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to speak to your group. This has been a pretty significant issue that a number of libraries have faced. You probably, if you haven't had questions or had reservations on your own, you've probably talked to some of your colleagues at other libraries about this, or you may have read some of the news reports about this. But the concern or the issue, and why I'm here to talk to you about this, is there have been concerns raised about restrictions on use of library meeting space. And so I want to start from the beginning, because one of the first questions that I always get is, does a library have an obligation to open up their meeting space or their meeting rooms to the public? And the answer is no. Now, I bet most of you do. If you have meeting room space in your libraries, you probably do open it up to the public to use, but there's no legal obligation that you do so. Once you do that, and again, most of you probably do have rooms that you allow the public to use. They could be study rooms, but more often the issues don't come in a study room, but more of the other meeting room space, maybe an auditorium or some other space. That once you've opened those up to the public, that the law, the Constitution, and the courts say that those meeting room spaces now have some First Amendment protections. You are public entities, so government libraries are public entities and public bodies, and so you are subject to protection and not infringement of people's First Amendment rights. That's true if they're speaking at a public meeting, so if you have a library board of trustees meeting, and that may be true in other public forum. Social media is another example where the courts have said, you know, your government social media sites and accounts have First Amendment protections, meaning you can't discriminate. So what does it mean in the context of a meeting room and that protection? If you've opened up your meeting rooms to the public, and that could mean even through a registration schedule, so you require people to register in advance, you have a policy and all of that. What you can't do is discriminate against a group or an organization or an activity or an event because you either disagree with the viewpoint, you or somebody else at the library, or even the public doing and denying use or restricting use based on that protected free speech right. Even disagreeable speech is protected speech in most cases. So you can't censor, and censor in this would be denying somebody use of a room because of their viewpoint, because of the nature or content of their speech, or because maybe a particular event would be controversial and might create, we know this, we've seen this, especially with, let's say, Pride Month and some of the other activities we do, even when it's library sponsored presentations, we have to be very careful about discriminating because the speech or the activity might be controversial. What you can do is apply what in the First Amendment parlance is called the time, place, and manner regulations. And you may have heard of those before. They are content neutral. So putting aside the viewpoint or the nature of the group or the organization that's using the space, that you can regulate how long they use the room. You can regulate where and which rooms, the number of attendees. So you may have room capacity issues. How many times a particular group or organization is allowed to use a meeting space. So I've seen policies where, and there's a very good reason for this, but where the library says X group or organization, and not picking and choosing which ones, but an organization or group can only use meeting space for, 3 times a year or 6 times a year, whatever that is. Those are time, place, and manner restrictions, and as long as they're applied equally, so everybody that comes in is treated the same. Now, you could treat different rooms differently. So obviously capacity of rooms will be different. Maybe you have a particular room like an auditorium that is much wanted. So everybody wants to use that auditorium, and to make sure that as many people as possible and groups and organizations have the ability to use that, maybe that room you limit to 1 time a year, and other rooms that maybe don't have as much room, you may not have limits. Those are time, place, and manner restrictions that don't depend on the viewpoint of the speaker or the nature of the event or activity. You can also restrict use to cardholders, and there's a very good reason for that. Cardholders are typically taxpayers. They have a reason to have a card. They are residents able to use that. And the use of the library, while open to the public, can have restrictions based on, let's say, the cardholder status. Not only are they likely to be taxpayers, but they're also can be tracked if there's an issue, if you have a problem, and having some preferences like that is not about the content of the speech or the nature of the group or organization. You can also charge a meeting room fee if it is generally applicable. And generally applicable means not based on the group or organization or the event or activity. But let's say that you had, let's say the auditorium, which requires many, many more library services than some of the other, maybe a 5-seat room. You could charge a fee for the auditorium as long as that fee was applied to everybody that used the auditorium. So again, so much of the First Amendment is about not discriminating and being equal and fair in how you enforce or administer your policies and regulations. Now, one of the other issues that has come up frequently is whether or not you can charge a security fee or pass on the costs of security. It's an interesting issue because there isn't any case locally or in Illinois about this, but I will tell you it's become a hotbed issue because the ACLU has become very interested in this. They are focused on whether or not libraries are charging security fees based on the content or the potential for controversy of an event or activity. It's not per se illegal. And I've had the conversation with the ACLU attorney about this, who acknowledged, yes, libraries can charge fees for their meeting room. The issue is if you're charging a fee because the event is going to be controversial, and that creates the potential. It's not per se unconstitutional, but it creates the potential for a challenge. So before you impose a fee or you amend your policy to include a fee, you'd want to talk to your attorney about that. When would you think a fee would be imposed? Or is it a reasonable security fee always for use of library meeting space? And in that case, maybe it would just be a meeting room fee. It doesn't necessarily have to be for security, but for facilities. But if you have discretion in imposing the fee, it could create the challenge by the ACLU or by some other group that you're only imposing it because of the impact from particular speech or the nature of the group. Couple of other things we have to be careful about: restricting or prohibiting political groups or religious groups. They have some heightened First Amendment protections. There have been cases specific on both issues. I think we're always careful about partisan use of public facilities for partisan, like fundraisers and things like that, because that is more of a maybe endorsement or concern about use of public facilities for political campaigning. That's different than a League of Women Voters using a room that might have some political implications, but they're not much different than another nonprofit. I would be very cautious how your policies are worded with respect to political groups and organizations. Just run that by your attorney. Make sure that you're good with the legality of that, because there have been cases. And same with religious. There is a case from many years ago that allowed a library to prohibit its use of its meeting rooms for worship. But then there's another case that said that you could not prohibit religious use of your meeting rooms where the use was similar to, let's say, another type of use that's secular. And I'll give an example. There's not a lot different in the court's view between a Bible study and a book group. You're maybe sitting around in a room and talking about a book, whatever that book is. And so I would be very careful. Take a look at your meeting room policies. That at the very least, you don't want to prohibit religious uses that would be similar to a secular use, because you're discriminating based on religion. With respect to worship, we have a case that says that it's allowed, but you never know how the courts are going to rule on that. I think there's a big difference between a couple of people in a Bible study, maybe saying some prayers, and a full-blown religious worship. But again, that's something you're going to want to work with your attorney on. Have them look at the cases. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see more cases in the future. This seems to be maybe ramping up a little bit, use of meeting rooms. Couple of other things. There's little to no privacy in use of a library meeting room. We have to remember that. I've been in many a library meeting room that is glass walled or that the door is propped open. I think that the people that are in those meeting rooms should, maybe it's good to remind them, or have maybe as part of the registration to let them know that they shouldn't have an expectation of privacy in there, in the rooms where it's glass walled, or the door, or maybe there isn't a door. So maybe it's in more of an open space, so that there isn't that expectation. We've had situations where First Amendment auditors have filmed through a glass wall or through an open propped open door. And if it's open to the view of the public, then it's open to being filmed by an auditor. And so maybe if there are sensitive meetings that people want to hold, you may have more appropriate meeting space for them, whether it's closing the door or signing the door or something along those lines. And sometimes it's just about communicating and making sure that the people understand that. So last, I'll just say that if you do open up your meeting rooms to the public, which I think most of you probably do, have a content neutral policy in place. I think you really want to make sure that you're regulating conduct in the room. If you don't want to allow food, whatever, putting them on notice if there's any damages, that they're responsible, the person that reserves the room, getting an idea of how many people are going to be in the room, less about the content, less about the nature of the group, but more about behavioral rules, which you certainly can impose, like you do, your code of conduct for general use of the library. You can certainly impose that, and maybe additional rules on use of the meeting space. The other thing I would recommend including in your policy is some language that the library is not endorsing just by having a group or allowing use of its meeting rooms. It's not endorsing the speech or the activities of that group. I think that's always a good thing to have in there, because again, if you can't regulate based on the content of the message, and so you're going to allow and you're going to have groups that maybe others in the community and in the library disagree with, having that language to make it clear we're not endorsing by allowing this use. This is a First Amendment space once we open it up. And sometimes there's going to be speech that some may disagree with, and that's just part of that. So that's my talk. I don't know if there are any questions, if we want to take any. I know you guys have a pretty full agenda.
I think we have time for a few questions. I can see there's a raised hand, so we'll get to that in just a moment. While you all are thinking of your questions, I do want to just call attention in the chat. Dan put a link to an FAQ about meeting rooms. This was compiled by Julie based on the questions that you all submitted to us a while back about some of the questions that you had about meeting rooms. So thank you very much for contributing to those questions. And if you'd like to take a look at that, please do. This will also appear in tomorrow's e-news. So I can see Amy had her hand raised. Team, can we unmute Amy? Is that possible?
Can you distinguish between for-profit and nonprofit groups and charge a fee for the for-profit groups?
I think you can. You can certainly, and I've seen many a policy that only allows nonprofit groups or individuals, so cardholders or nonprofit organizations or groups or government groups. I've seen that as well, to limit the use of the meeting room space. I think that furthers the mission of the library, which is not to, promote commercial activities in the library, but maybe educational and community type activities that you would be able to support that. As for charging a fee for a for-profit group, I would be careful about that. I would run it by your attorney to make sure that they're comfortable with that. Some of it may come down to what if there's a thought that we're discriminating for-profit groups because of potential commercial speech. I also would think about what the difference is between a for-profit and a nonprofit with respect to the fees. Presumably the services that are being provided and that are being used are the same. So it may be difficult to justify charging a fee. Although I know municipalities will do that sometimes and provide waivers. So there's a possibility of something like that. It's always, whenever you do something different and distinguish between a particular group, you have to think about is there a justifiable reason that is non-discriminatory, so that doesn't relate to any kind of speech or protected class to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
I see a couple of questions in the Q&A. Do you want me, Monica, just to read those, or?
Sure, that'd be great, Julie. Thank you.
Okay, I see the first one is our policy requires users to allow members of the public to attend if they want to, none ever do. Is this necessary? I would assume it would open up closed door meetings to First Amendment auditors. This is a really interesting question because we've been doing a lot of policy reviews for our library clients recently, our library team has, and we have seen this in most of the policies. And it seems so unusual to say that you have to register for a particular meeting space. So you've got to pre-register and maybe pay a fee or provide your cardholder information and maybe even the number of people. And then all of a sudden the policy says, oh, and you have to allow your meeting to be open to the public. And so we've talked about it internally, and we think that the intention of that was not to say open to anyone and everyone, but more to address an ADA or other type of issue where we need to make our meeting rooms accessible so anyone can that wants to attend, maybe that has been invited to attend can. It's the only thing that makes sense because yes, your library is open to the public, but not every space in the library is open at all times to the public. And so if you have a registration for a particular room and those folks have invited, X, Y, and Z to the group, to open it to the public could exceed capacity, could create a lot of other issues. So I think it's worth taking a look at that. I know we have eliminated it from a lot of the policies we've drafted and replaced it with language about that the group can't engage in discrimination, and the group needs to make sure that it's accessible and that sort of language. So that might be another option to that. The next question, does copyright protections over a presentation being given in a meeting room allow the presenter to stop a First Amendment auditor from recording? And this was also addressed in the FAQ. I know this question came up and we looked at this. this seems a little bit different than the question I think that we responded to, which seemed more about a presenter that a library would hire. And so a vendor that you hire to make a library presentation. And if that contract with the presenter says that nobody can record the meeting, certainly the library, as part of offering that as a library event or activity, could say no recording. Whether or not the copyright protections over the presentation, whether the presenter could say you can't record, if it is an open meeting space and it's viewable by the public, it certainly could get the library in trouble if the library were to say stop recording. Could the presenter say stop recording? Sure, they're not the government. You know, the First Amendment applies to the government. If the presenter wants to say none of the attendees can record, let them do that as opposed to the library making that call. If the room is secured, in other words, it's locked or signed, registrants only or something like that, I think it's much less of an issue. If the presentation's given in an open area, I'm not sure that the library wants to get involved in stopping the recording.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with all of us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you all very much for your questions. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Next on our agenda is Larissa Distler, Adult Services Librarian at the Galena Public Library, who's joining us today to speak about the Galena LitFest. Welcome, Larissa.
Hello. All right, so thank you so much for having me. I really love to talk about Galena LitFest. It's very near and dear to my heart, so I'm really excited to talk to all of you today, and thank you for Rails for bringing me to this member update today. Like was said, I'm Larissa Distler. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Galena Public Library. We're a pretty small library with a service population of 4,518, and I'm the only person working adult services. So I handle all the adult fiction collection development, marketing, PR, and programming, and all of that kind of goes into the work that I do for LitFest. So what is it? My goals with the festival in kind of a broad perspective are to bring readers and writers together, give aspiring writers tools to be inspired, to hone their craft, and to network with each other, to showcase the diversity of literature in all its forms, to bring a broader range of perspectives to our community, and to elevate the library through partnerships and outreach. And this picture here is one of our LitFest authors working with our second grade. So that was a lot of fun. So the idea actually came out of a brainstorm during one of my annual employee evaluations. The library director said, just go for it. So I jumped in and made it happen with a really supportive director and library staff. January was chosen because Galena is a really busy tourist town and our weekends are so full of activities all year round, except for January when traffic really slows down and businesses are looking for ways to bring people into town and bring crowds into their establishments. This is one of the few library events that our tourism bureau has historically provided help with promoting. Our patrons, of course, are always the focus, but LitFest is farther reaching than that to the benefit of our patrons, especially now that we have virtual events as well. So I started in 2015 with all of the events located in one place at the DeSoto House Hotel on Main Street, all in one day. We did a local author fair, a workshop, and a Meet the Author event with Heather Gudenkoff. And then every year, as you can kind of see with these posters here, we added more and more and more things every year, made it more exciting until it kind of outgrew itself. But these photos here are some of those early days. We added a ticketed dinner in 2016 and a ticketed brunch in 2018. All the other events have still remained free. Dinner started out as kind of a mixed bag. I liked to pair traditionally published bestseller with an indie author, usually the most recent soon-to-be famous winner, but not always. There was no theme other than books and literature and the love of those things. So you can see we kind of started right off the bat with a really great audience. That's Michael Allen Peck, the 2016 soon-to-be famous author winner up at the top. The lower left is Deb Miller as Jane Austen. And then that's my library director and myself down in the lower right with Mary Kubica, a best-selling author, and Geraldine Heslau McGrady, the 2016 or 17 winner of the soon-to-be famous Illinois Author Project. So then in 2019, we took everything out into the community even further by hosting events over a 2-week period in different locations, including other organizations, restaurants, B&Bs, the public school, and anywhere else that would have us really throughout town. In 2019 and 2020 were our best years for attendance. We had a lot of great events in a lot of different places and people got really excited. But then in 2021 and 2022, everything went virtual due to COVID-19 lockdown, which was actually amazing in a lot of ways because honorarium suddenly became a lot lower and we didn't have to worry about travel reimbursements. So we were able to host authors like Rebecca Mackay and Casey McQuiston and others who were farther away. They wouldn't have been in our budget for an in-person talk. And on top of that, by using Eventbrite for ticketing, which is a nation or a global event ticketing platform, we were able to really branch out, and people from all over the world came and joined our Zooms, which was really great, bringing cultural perspectives and fascinating conversations for our patrons. It was a really very special experience. In 2022, we resumed in-person programming, but maintained options for virtual attendance by offering both Zoom and hybrid programs. And 2024 was our 10th year, so we expanded over 4 months and had a theme every month and offered in-person, virtual, and hybrid options for each one of those. Then this year, we went all back to 1 month and kept the multiple formats and locations. We actually didn't have a program in the library at all this year. We worked with the community stakeholders over the year of 2024 to name Galena's first poet laureate. So we had him speak with Jenna Goldsmith, poet laureate of Rockford, at a local bar. One of our local professor emeritus spoke about his new book on natural areas in the Midwest at the Galena Center for the Arts. I was also excited to be able to have 2 virtual workshops, one on mystery writing and one on nonfiction. And we also partnered with a brand new venue to put on a full Filipino dinner with Mia P. Manansala, the author of the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series, which is really exciting. So since 2023, we really strive to create a really unique experience when planning our dinners and a completely different kind of thing each year. The first photo there is Beth Dooley, with a local chef from Galena Cellars Vineyard. They worked together to prepare a meal based on the recipes in her books, using locally grown products. They worked with our local food co-op to have a whole local meal in January, which was really fun and interesting and quite impressive. The second picture there is from last year's dinner, which we had a local theater troupe do a whole improv Sherlock murder mystery dinner, which featured an English club menu. And the third picture on the end there is our dinner with Mia Manansala and the delicious Filipino buffet that our venue created for us. We've always had really great ticket sales with all of our dinners and brunches, but these last 3 years of dinners completely sold out and had wait lists for each one, even when there was lots of snow. Ooh. So some questions I get asked quite a bit. When does planning start? It starts, we plan all year round, essentially. I get ideas and I just sort of go for it. A lot of authors talk about whether they're a pantser or a plotter. I'm definitely a programming pantser. So planning is going on all year. And who do I choose? How do I choose who to book? There's a lot of steps for that. First of all, I work the desk a lot and I manage adult fiction. So I can kind of use that knowledge to know who our patrons and community are reading. Then I look at what authors are the closest, so that we can have people drive. We've never had anyone fly out, and I don't want to start doing that. It's just a whole other piece of the puzzle that I'm not ready to fit in yet. So we look at location, we look at who our people are reading. Sometimes I take a gamble with Mia Manansala, for example. Her books were not well read here. They didn't circulate very well at all, but I took a gamble because she was close. She's just in the Chicago suburbs. And I thought that the food would be enough to bring people in. And so I took a gamble and it did work out. We sold that dinner out. The budget I started off in 2015 with less than $2,000. My 2025 budget was only $7,000. That's still a pretty small number. It's a unique program in our overall budget because it's a program that has both revenue and expenses. There have been years where I've solicited for donations to offset the cost to the library, and we sell tickets to cover the food costs. But just like all the other library programs, their goal is not to make a profit. Is January problematic? There's only been 1 year, 2020, that we had to reschedule programming due to snow, so it hasn't actually been that much of a problem. I think for a lot of people, the desire to get out of the house in January is greater than the fear of the weather. And like I've said before, businesses are more willing to work with us in the off season, so it works out really well, actually. And advice for booking an author. My biggest piece of advice is to get as close to the actual author as you can get when you reach out. Sometimes I've been able to find a direct to author email. That's the best case scenario. Second best is going through a publicist at the publishing house. A speakers bureau or agency is often the worst case scenario for budget reasons. My second piece of advice would be that once you make contact, don't ask for their fee, make an offer based on what you can afford and go from there. I've never paid more than $1,000 plus mileage for any of our authors. And often we can get local Airbnbs in town to provide free lodging for them. Third, you have to give them all the information in your first email: date, time, location. Will there be a bookstore present? How many books do you expect to sell? How many people do you expect will attend? Will they be expected to deliver a keynote, or will someone facilitate a conversation? How long will they be expected to linger for schmoozing and signing after their presentation? Is lodging provided? And of course, the presentation or the compensation that you plan on offering them, including any reimbursements for travel, meals, etc. I also, for our dinners, always offer an option for a comped +1 ticket for those authors. If any of that is to be TBD or flexible, that's okay. Just be really upfront about it right off the bat. Usually you'll have an answer pretty quickly whether or not they'll come and do the program for you. I do have a proposal template that I've used over the years that I'm happy to share with anyone who would like it. My contact info will be at the end of the presentation. And the bottom line with trying to book anybody is just don't be afraid to ask, don't be afraid to make an offer, and be prepared. So this is kind of an overview of the last 11 years that we've been doing this festival. COVID kind of throws a monkey wrench in the whole thing, but this is where we are. We've always gotten really great feedback. I create these infographics for our board every year. And these are our attendance numbers. So it's difficult to base any assumptions off these numbers alone, since each year is so different. But this gives you kind of an idea of the numbers we see. They might not look like big numbers to some of you out there in large library systems, but my biggest takeaway is that LitFest attendance is on average 46 to 67% higher than all of our other adult programming. It's become something our community really looks forward to every year. I really love mixing it up and trying different things. And it's a great place to experiment because it does, at this point, have a built-in audience of people who are going to show up for most, if not all, of the events every year. And at the moment, I'm brainstorming what 2026 will look like. It's Galena's bicentennial, so I'm working on how to fit that into the equation. But otherwise, I'm just following a couple of leads. Nothing concrete yet. But that's what I have. Thank you. If anyone has any questions for me, I can answer them now, or we can, there's my email and our library phone number if you'd like to get into touch with me about anything that I covered or maybe didn't cover that you're wondering about. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. This was so fantastic. It's so great to hear how you're doing such an engaging program with your community, and something that has really grown in terms of the kind of support that you've seen. And thank you so much for sharing this with all of us.
Thank you.
Well, I don't see any questions right now in the chat, but you all got Larissa's email. And so you know how to get a hold of her if you need to. We'll look forward to future LitFest. Give us something to look forward to in a cold January to come. But thank you so much for sharing with us today, Larissa. All
Thank
right,
you for
next,
having me.
of course. Next on our agenda, we're going to move to Rails' own Kate Niehoff, Director of Consulting and Continuing Education here at Rails, who's going to talk about the Rails Learning Labs. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, let me bring up my one slide. So as you all know, Rails does a number of continuing education webinars and in-person events every month. And for the most part, those are opportunities to kind of learn from an expert who's speaking on the topic, and they're passive opportunities. And we know that sometimes it's easier to learn by doing and getting your hands dirty. So we've started this new monthly series called Rails Learning Labs, and the focus is on hands-on learning and active participation to learn something new. So right now, the series is completely online, and that's so that the most staff from the most member libraries can attend no matter where they fall on the map. They're small groups, like 50 people, and the focus is on interaction, participation, experimenting together, sharing tips and learning with one another. So it's a little bit different than what we usually do. So to give you an idea, in January, our topic was AI for better workflows. So our group experimented with different AI tools to make things easier, like writing, data analysis, and it, just gave everybody a chance to figure things out with other people. And then next week, we've got one on alt text. We'll be learning how to write alt text for images on the web and in social media. That one is full, but we did just publish our March Learning Lab. That's going to take place on March 14th. And we are going to learn how to write effective grant proposals together. That one was just published, so there's still room in it, but it's going to be promoted in the e-news tomorrow, and it'll fill up pretty quickly. So if I were you, I would register soon if you're interested. And then in April, this one isn't published yet, but we're looking at learning how to create more accessible PDFs. So those are ideas. And as far as who's presenting these, we're really hoping that they are peer-led workshops, because we know that staff at our member libraries have a lot of knowledge and creativity and innovation to share. So we're hoping that staff from our member libraries can present as many of these as possible. You do not need to be an expert. In January, our AI workshop was led by somebody who called herself an AI hobbyist. So no formal training or anything like that. So even if you're not an expert, if you've done your own learning on something, we'd love to have you present for us. We do have a link on our website. If you go to railslibraries.org under the services menu, and then under education, you'll see a lead a workshop link. I encourage you to fill that out if you have something to share. And if you don't have something to share, but you do have suggestions for topics that you'd like to learn more about in a hands-on setting, you can drop those in the chat now, or you can always reach out to the continuing education team at ce@railslibraries.org. That is all I have for you today.
Thank you so
stop
much,
sharing.
Kate. And you guys can all see in the chat, Nikki's put in a link to the next event on grant writing, as well as a link to the form that Kate mentioned, where you can also suggest a potential workshop to lead yourself. I think this is such an exciting opportunity because we know we have so many members who are really active learners and really can use this opportunity to kind of share their learning with others. So thanks, Kate, for your efforts in sharing this with all of us. And I hope so many of you out there can participate in these because we're really excited about them. Well, next on our agenda is the opportunity to share library news. If you would like to share something that's going on in your library, I encourage you to go ahead and share it in the chat, and we can go ahead and read out for all something that is happening at your library that you would like to share with the rest of us. I'll also note if anyone has any questions or anything that we've talked about today that you'd like to ask, this is also an opportunity for you to share. Well, if there's no further questions in the chat, we want to thank all of you for joining us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to share. Oh, and I can see there's one from Christy. It says the Creston Dement Library will be opening our new library building sometime in March. Congratulations, Christy. So exciting, and we can't wait to see it. I'm sure this is a really great time for everybody there. All right, all. We really appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you today. You know how to get a hold of us if you need us. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great Valentine's Day, and we will all be talking with you soon. Thanks all for coming today.